The white Ford Transit van rolled to a stop at Arches National Park in Utah, and inside, 22-year-old Gabby Petito was crying. Not the gentle tears of someone moved by beauty, but the desperate, gasping sobs of someone who felt their world crumbling. Her fiancé, Brian Laundrie, sat beside her, and something was terribly wrong. But what had brought this young couple, who seemed so happy on social media just days before, to this breaking point? And why would this moment, captured by police body cameras on August 12th, 2021, become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in a case that would captivate millions? The story of Gabby Petito didn't begin with tragedy. It began with a dream that countless young people share, a dream of freedom and adventure on the open road. Gabby and Brian had been together for over 2 years, high school sweethearts from Blue Point, New York, who decided to document their cross-country van life journey for the world to see. Their Instagram account showed pristine photos of Gabby posing in front of stunning landscapes, her bright smile seemingly reflecting pure joy. The caption spoke of living simply, following dreams, and finding happiness in the journey rather than the destination. To their growing followers, they were living the ultimate millennial dream, trading conventional life for adventure in a converted van. But social media only shows what people want you to see. What was happening behind those carefully curated photos? What was really going on inside that white van as it traveled through America's most beautiful landscapes? Gabby had spent months preparing for this trip. She'd worked long hours as a nutritionist and pharmacy technician, saving every dollar she could. Brian, who worked at an organic juice bar, had joined her in the planning. Together, they'd converted the van, installing shelving, a small bed, and storage for their camping equipment. The plan was ambitious. They would spend 4 months traveling through national parks, from New York to Oregon, documenting everything for their YouTube channel and Instagram. Gabby dreamed of becoming a successful travel influencer, building a career out of inspiring others to chase their own adventures. On July 2nd, 2021, they left New York, and for the first few weeks, everything seemed to go according to plan. Photos from Kansas showed Gabby grinning widely, her arms outstretched in a sunflower field. Videos from Colorado showed them hiking together, laughing, enjoying the freedom they worked so hard to create. But behind these moments, tensions were already building, tensions that would eventually explode in ways no one could have predicted. The first major crack appeared in public view on August 12th in Moab, Utah. A 911 call came in that afternoon, a witness reporting a domestic dispute involving a white van with Florida plates. The caller, identified later as Christopher, told dispatch he'd watched a young man slapping and hitting a young woman before the couple climbed back into their vehicle. The description was concerning enough that Moab police officers Eric Pratt and Daniel Robbins responded immediately. What they found when they pulled over the van near the entrance to Arches National Park was a scene that, in retrospect, should have raised far more alarm bells than it did. Gabby was in the passenger seat, her face red and tear-streaked, her hands shaking as she tried to explain what had happened. Brian was calmer, more composed, his responses measured and controlled. The officers separated them to get their stories, and what emerged was a picture of a relationship under severe strain. Gabby told the officers through tears that she and Brian had been arguing all morning. She suffered from anxiety and OCD, she explained, and she'd been frustrated with Brian for tracking dirt into the van with his dirty feet. The argument had escalated. She admitted to hitting him, to trying to get his attention, to feeling completely overwhelmed by her emotions. She apologized repeatedly, taking full responsibility for the altercation. She seemed desperate to convince the officers that everything was her fault, that Brian had done nothing wrong. Brian's story was different in subtle but significant ways. He had scratches on his face and arms, which he said came from Gabby. He claimed she'd grabbed the steering wheel while he was driving, that she'd hit him, that he'd just been trying to de-escalate the situation. He spoke calmly, rationally, painting himself as the victim of an out-of-control girlfriend. He even made jokes with the officers, establishing a rapport that clearly influenced how they perceived the situation. The officers spent over an hour at the scene trying to determine what had actually happened and what they should do about it. They reviewed Utah's domestic violence laws, debated whether either person should be charged, and ultimately made a decision that would later be scrutinized by millions. They classified the incident as a mental health crisis rather than domestic violence. They decided to separate the couple for the night, with Brian staying in a hotel and Gabby remaining with the van, and they let them both go without filing charges. But what the officers didn't fully understand, what perhaps couldn't be seen in that single snapshot of time, was the pattern that might have been developing. Domestic violence experts who later reviewed the body cam footage pointed out numerous red flags. Gabby's frantic apologizing, her willingness to take all the blame, her visible distress compared to Brian's calm demeanor. These could all be signs of an abusive relationship rather than an isolated incident caused by her mental health struggles. The witness who called 911 had described Brian as the aggressor, hitting Gabby. Yet somehow, by the time police interviewed them, the narrative had flipped, and Gabby was the one apologizing, the one who seemed unstable. After that night, the couple reunited and continued their journey. Photos from the next 2 weeks showed them at various locations across Utah and Wyoming. On August 25th, Gabby's mother, Nicole Schmidt, received a text from Gabby's phone. No service in Yosemite. But there was something wrong with this message, something that would later seem significant. Gabby always called Yosemite by its full name, never just Yosemite, and they weren't supposed to be anywhere near Yosemite according to their planned route. That was the last substantive communication anyone in Gabby's family received from her. A few more brief texts came through over the next few days, but they were odd, impersonal, unlike Gabby's usual style. Her mother tried calling repeatedly, no answer. On August 27th, a final text came through. Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls. Stan was Gabby's grandfather, but Gabby never called him Stan. She called him Grandpa. Nicole immediately knew something was wrong. That text hadn't been written by her daughter. September 1st, 2021 was the day everything changed, though the full picture wouldn't emerge for days. On that date, Brian Laundrie returned to his parents' home in Northport, Florida. Driving Gabby's white Ford Transit van, he arrived alone. He didn't call Gabby's parents to explain where she was. He didn't file a missing person report. He simply came home, hired a lawyer, and refused to say a single word about what had happened to his fiancée. For 10 days, Gabby's family heard nothing. They called Brian's parents, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie, begging for any information about their daughter. The Laundries refused to take their calls. They called Brian's cell phone. He didn't answer. They tried texting, emailing, reaching out through any channel they could think of. Silence. The desperate parents couldn't understand it. If Brian and Gabby had simply broken up during the trip, why wouldn't he tell them where he'd left her? Why wouldn't he at least confirm she was safe? Unless he couldn't confirm she was safe, unless something terrible had happened. On September 11th, 10 days after Brian returned home alone, Gabby's parents finally filed a missing person report with the Suffolk County Police Department in New York. The case was immediately transferred to the Northport Police Department in Florida, where Brian was living. Officers went to the Laundrie home to ask questions. Brian's parents handed them a business card for their lawyer, Stephen Bertolino. No one in the family would speak to police, not to explain where they'd last seen Gabby, not to provide any information that might help find her, not even to express concern for the missing young woman who'd been living with them and was engaged to their son. The silence from the Laundrie family was deafening and deeply disturbing. In the court of public opinion, which was rapidly forming online as news of Gabby's disappearance spread, and their refusal to cooperate seemed like an admission of guilt. What innocent person refuses to help find their missing fiancé? What loving parents of an innocent son wouldn't want him to tell police everything he knew to help locate a young woman they'd known for years? As investigators began piecing together Gabby and Brian's movements, the public became increasingly invested in finding her. Social media exploded with theories, tips, and amateur detective work. The hashtag #FindGabby trended on Twitter. TikTok users posted videos analyzing every detail of Gabby's Instagram posts and YouTube videos, looking for clues. Facebook groups dedicated to the search attracted hundreds of thousands of members. True crime enthusiasts, concerned citizens, and armchair detectives all joined the effort to locate Gabby Petito. And the case struck a chord for several reasons. Gabby seemed relatable, an ordinary young woman chasing an extraordinary dream. Her social media presence meant people felt they knew her, had followed her journey, had invested in her story. The van life angle added intrigue. Many people fantasized about such adventures themselves. And the mystery of Brian's silence was infuriating. Why wouldn't he just tell everyone where Gabby was? The more he refused to speak, the more suspicious he seemed, and the more determined people became to find answers. On September 14, Brian's lawyer released a brief statement. On the advice of counsel, the Laundrie family is remaining in the background at this juncture and will have no further comment. The statement did nothing to quell the growing outrage. Protesters began gathering outside the Laundrie home, demanding answers. News vans lined the street. The case was becoming a national obsession. Behind the scenes, investigators were working frantically to trace Gabby's last known movements. They determined that she and Brian had been in the Grand Teton National Park area in Wyoming in late August. Witnesses reported seeing their van at various locations. Security footage from businesses in the area was being reviewed. The FBI took over the case, treating it as a missing person investigation that could potentially become something much darker. Then came a breakthrough, though not from traditional police work. A family from Florida, the Bethunes, had been traveling through Grand Teton around the same time as Gabby and Brian. They'd been recording their trip with a dash cam and posting the footage to YouTube. After seeing news coverage of Gabby's disappearance, they reviewed their footage and discovered something stunning. On August 27th, their camera had captured a white Ford Transit van with Florida plates parked along a remote stretch of road near Spread Creek in the Bridger Teton National Forest. The location and timing matched up perfectly with when Gabby was believed to have last been alive. The Bethunes immediately contacted the FBI, providing the footage and the GPS coordinates. On September 19, 2021, FBI agents and search teams descended on the area. The Spread Creek dispersed camping area was remote and beautiful, surrounded by stunning mountain views, the kind of place that would have been perfect for Gabby's Instagram feed. But on this day, it would yield up a heartbreaking discovery. At approximately 3:30 p.m. local time, searchers found a body in the wilderness near where the van had been parked. While it would take time for official identification through forensic analysis, investigators were fairly certain based on the description and location. They'd found Gabby Petito. The search for a missing person had become a homicide investigation. The news hit the public like a punch to the gut. For 8 days, people had held out hope that Gabby might be found alive, that maybe she'd gotten lost hiking, or there'd been some other explanation. Those hopes died with the discovery of her body. Vigils were held across the country. Flowers and messages appeared at the site where she was found. Social media filled with grief, anger, and demands for justice. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. What had happened to Gabby? And where was Brian Laundrie? Because Brian was gone. On September 17th, 2 days before Gabby's body was found, Brian's parents had reported to Northport police that they hadn't seen their son since September 14th. They claimed he'd gone for a hike in the Carlton Reserve, a 25,000-acre wilderness preserve near their home, carrying only a backpack. He hadn't returned. Police immediately organized a search of the reserve, but the terrain was challenging. Vast stretches of swampland, dense vegetation, alligators, and snakes. Finding one person in that environment would be extraordinarily difficult. The timing of Brian's disappearance raised obvious questions. Had he fled after learning that Gabby's body had been found, or had his departure been planned much earlier? Some experts suggested the Laundrie family's behavior indicated they'd been preparing for Brian to disappear since he first returned from the trip. The hiring of a lawyer before Gabby was even reported missing, the refusal to cooperate with police, and now Brian's sudden vanishing all seemed too coordinated to be coincidental. On September 21st, the FBI issued a federal arrest warrant for Brian Laundrie. Interestingly, the charge wasn't related to Gabby's death directly, at least not yet. Instead, he was charged with unauthorized use of a debit card. According to the warrant, between August 30th and September 1st, someone had used a Capital One Bank debit card and a personal identification number for accounts belonging to Gabby Petito, making unauthorized withdrawals and charges totaling more than $1,000. Brian was the suspect. While it seemed like a minor charge given the circumstances, it gave law enforcement the legal authority they needed to pursue him as a fugitive. The search for Brian Laundrie became a national manhunt. The FBI deployed teams of agents. Northport police organized daily searches of the Carlton Reserve. Dog the Bounty Hunter, the reality TV star, even got involved, claiming to have tips about Brian's whereabouts. Reported sightings came in from all over the country. Someone thought they saw him in Alabama. Another person claimed to have spotted him in Canada. None of the tips panned out. Brian Laundrie had seemingly vanished. As the search continued, more information about Gabby's final days emerged. On September 21st, the Teton County coroner, Dr. Brent Blue, held a press conference confirming that the body found at Spread Creek was indeed Gabby Petito and ruling her death a homicide. He didn't immediately release the cause or manner of death, citing the ongoing investigation. But the homicide ruling confirmed everyone's worst fears. Gabby hadn't died by accident. Someone had killed her. Witness reports helped establish a timeline of those final days. On August 27th, a couple who'd been traveling through Grand Teton came forward to say they'd given Brian a ride. They'd picked him up hitchhiking near Coulter Bay Village. Brian told them he'd been camping alone for multiple days out at Spread Creek and needed to get back to his van, which he said was parked at the Jackson Lake Dam. But as they drove, Brian suddenly became agitated when it became clear they were heading to Jackson Hole instead of Jackson Lake Dam. He offered them $200 and insisted on getting out of the vehicle immediately. The couple found his behavior strange enough that they remembered it clearly. Another witness, a TikTok user named Miranda Baker, reported that she and her boyfriend had also given Brian a ride on August 29th. He told them a similar story about camping alone and needing to get back to his girlfriend at their van. These accounts suggested Brian was in the Grand Teton area for several days after Gabby likely died, possibly attempting to establish an alibi or confuse the timeline. On October 12th, 2021, Dr. Blue held another press conference with updated information. This one revealed the cause of Gabby's death: manual strangulation, meaning someone had killed her with their bare hands. The coroner estimated she'd been dead for 3 to 4 weeks before being found, which placed her death sometime in late August, likely around August 27th or 28th. The manner of death was homicide by strangulation, and there was evidence she'd also suffered other injuries from blunt force trauma. The details were horrifying. Strangulation is one of the most intimate forms of murder, requiring the killer to maintain pressure for several minutes while the victim struggles. It's personal, violent, and suggests intense rage or a desperate need for control. For Gabby's family and the millions following the case, learning these details was devastating. This vibrant young woman who dreamed of inspiring others through her travels had died alone in the wilderness, killed by someone she trusted, someone who'd then abandoned her body and driven her van home as if nothing had happened. But where was Brian? The search of the Carlton Reserve continued day after day with no results. Divers searched the waterways. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew over the area. Cadaver dogs were brought in. The FBI was reportedly spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on the manhunt. Critics began questioning whether Brian had ever actually entered the reserve at all. Had the Laundries misled police about where their son had gone to buy him time to flee further? The Laundrie family's attorney, Stephen Bertolino, periodically released statements, but they revealed little. He confirmed that Brian's parents hadn't spoken to their son since he allegedly left for his hike. He said the family was cooperating with law enforcement, though many found that claim dubious given their earlier refusal to provide any information. He occasionally pushed back against media coverage he deemed unfair, but never addressed the central question everyone wanted answered. What happened to Gabby Petito? Meanwhile, civil attorneys for Gabby's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Brian's estate, seeking damages for pain and suffering, loss of life, and funeral expenses. The lawsuit kept legal pressure on the Laundrie family even as the criminal investigation appeared stalled. Throughout October, the search continued, but hope of finding Brian alive dwindled. Some speculated he died by suicide in the reserve, while others believed he'd escaped to Mexico or was hiding with help from friends or family. Conspiracy theories flourished online. The case remained constantly in the news with updates even when there was nothing new to report. The public's fascination hadn't waned. People still desperately wanted answers, wanted justice for Gabby, wanted to understand how a dream road trip had ended in such tragedy. Then on October 20th, 2021, came the discovery everyone had been anticipating but dreading. Stephen Bertolino released a statement announcing that items belonging to Brian had been found in the Carlton Reserve, and shortly after, the FBI confirmed they discovered human remains in the Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park, an area connected to the Carlton Reserve. And the remains were found in a location that had previously been underwater due to flooding, but had recently dried out enough for searchers to access it. The next day, dental records confirmed what most people had already assumed. The remains were Brian Laundrie's. He'd been dead likely for weeks, possibly since shortly after he entered the reserve. Found near his remains were a backpack and a notebook that he'd apparently been carrying when he died. The manner of death wouldn't be officially determined for several more weeks, but preliminary findings suggested no foul play was involved. On November 23rd, the FBI confirmed that Brian died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He'd apparently brought a gun into the reserve and used it to end his life. The notebook found with his body contained writings, though the FBI didn't immediately reveal their contents. For Gabby's family, Brian's death meant they'd never get the full truth about what happened. There would be no trial, no opportunity to confront him, no chance for him to explain why he'd killed the woman he supposedly loved. But the FBI's investigation continued. On January 21st, 2022, the FBI Denver field office released a statement closing the Gabby Petito case. They confirmed that all investigative findings indicated Brian Laundrie was responsible for Gabby's death, and that he'd killed her in Wyoming before returning to Florida. No other individuals were being sought in connection with her murder. Around the same time, the contents of Brian's notebook began emerging. According to reports, Brian had written what amounted to a confession, though the details remained sealed as part of the investigation. In his writings, Brian claimed Gabby had been injured, and he'd made the decision to end her life because she was in pain. He framed it as a mercy killing, saying he thought he was ending her suffering. Investigators and experts who reviewed the notebook found this explanation inconsistent with the evidence. The manual strangulation and other injuries Gabby sustained didn't match the scenario Brian described. It appeared to be an attempt to justify his actions, to paint himself as having acted out of love rather than rage or the need for control. Gabby's family responded with understandable anger to this final manipulation. Their daughter hadn't needed mercy killing. She'd needed protection from the person who'd promised to love her. Brian's confession, if it could even be called that, was seen as one final attempt to control the narrative, to avoid full responsibility even in death. In May 2022, Gabby's family's civil lawsuit expanded to include Christopher and Roberta Laundrie, Brian's parents. The lawsuit alleged that the Laundries had knowledge of Gabby's murder and intentionally caused the Petito family emotional distress through their actions and statements after Brian returned to Florida. The complaint specifically cited a statement from the Laundrie's attorney on September 14, 2021, expressing hope that Gabby would be reunited with her family when the lawsuit alleged the Laundries knew or should have known she was already dead. The civil case proceeded through the courts while the criminal investigation officially closed. In March 2023, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie's attorney filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit, arguing that his clients had a First Amendment right to remain silent and that they had no legal obligation to speak to the Petito family. Judges would ultimately need to decide whether the Laundrie's silence crossed legal lines from protected behavior into intentional infliction of emotional distress. Throughout all of this, one question continued to haunt everyone following the case. Why? Why had Brian killed Gabby? What had happened in those final hours and days? The body cam footage from Moab provided some context, showing a relationship already under strain. But what had escalated things to murder? Had there been another fight? Had Gabby threatened to leave him? Had she discovered something? Had his need for control finally exploded into fatal violence? Domestic violence experts who studied the case pointed to several red flags that had been present throughout the relationship. The Moab incident, when re-examined, showed classic patterns of abuse and manipulation. Brian's calm demeanor and ability to present himself as the victim while Gabby fell apart emotionally was characteristic of abusers who'd spent time conditioning their partners to take blame. Gabby's anxiety and OCD, which she'd mentioned to police, might have been exacerbated by being in a controlling relationship rather than being the cause of problems, as both she and Brian had suggested to officers. Friends and family members began sharing stories that painted a troubling picture. Brian had sometimes been controlling about Gabby's time and activities, and he'd been jealous when other men paid attention to her. There were reports of arguments before the trip about whether Gabby should focus so much on her social media presence. Some who knew them suggested Brian resented Gabby's growing online following, that he'd wanted the trip to be about them as a couple, but Gabby was increasingly treating it as a solo content creation opportunity. The case also raised broader questions about how society treats missing persons cases. Media coverage of Gabby's disappearance had been extensive and immediate, but advocates pointed out that not all missing persons receive such attention. The phenomenon became known as missing white woman syndrome, highlighting how young, attractive white women like Gabby received disproportionate media coverage compared to missing persons of color or from marginalized communities. The indigenous community in particular noted that hundreds of Native American women go missing every year with minimal news coverage or public interest. While Gabby's case deserved every bit of attention it received, advocates argued that same urgency should be applied to all missing persons, regardless of their race, gender, or background. For Gabby's family, the pain of losing their daughter was compounded by having to grieve publicly. Nicole Schmidt and Joseph Petito established the Gabby Petito Foundation to honor their daughter's memory and help other families dealing with missing loved ones or domestic violence situations. They began advocating for better domestic violence training for law enforcement, hoping that future cases might be handled differently than that fateful traffic stop in Moab. If the officers that day had recognized the signs of abuse, if they'd taken the witness report of Brian hitting Gabby more seriously, if they had arrested someone and forced a separation beyond just one night, could Gabby still be alive? It's a painful question with no answer, but one that drives the family's advocacy work. The impact of Gabby's case extended into popular culture and public discourse in unexpected ways. Her story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of idealized social media presentations. Those perfect Instagram photos of Gabby smiling in front of stunning vistas had hidden a darker reality. The comments on those posts, and if you scrolled back through them after her death, were heartbreaking in their innocence. People writing couple goals and living the dream next to photos taken days before Gabby's murder. The juxtaposition reminded everyone that social media shows curated moments, not complete truths, and that behind seemingly perfect lives, people might be struggling or even in danger. The van life community also grappled with the case's implications. Many people pursuing or dreaming of similar adventures felt torn between not wanting to let Gabby's tragedy define their lifestyle choice and recognizing the vulnerabilities inherent in traveling in isolated areas with a partner. Women in particular began having conversations about safety, about ensuring friends and family knew their locations, and about recognizing warning signs in relationships before committing to living in a confined space with someone far from support systems. True crime content creators faced ethical questions about how to cover the case respectfully while satisfying public interest. Some channels and podcasters handled it well, focusing on facts and advocating for justice and domestic violence awareness. Others were criticized for sensationalizing Gabby's death, creating clickbait thumbnails with her image, or speculating wildly beyond what evidence supported. The line between informing the public and exploiting tragedy for views became a frequent topic of debate. As 2023 progressed, the civil lawsuit against the Laundries moved forward. In September 2023, a judge denied the motion to dismiss, allowing the case to proceed toward trial. The ruling meant that Christopher and Roberta Laundrie would potentially face depositions and have to answer questions under oath about what they knew and when they knew it. For Gabby's family, this represented a chance to finally get some answers directly from people who might have crucial information about those missing days between Brian's return and Gabby being reported missing. However, in February 2024, just before the scheduled trial date, the parties reached a confidential settlement. The terms weren't disclosed publicly, but the settlement meant there would be no trial, no public testimony from the Laundries, no further airing of evidence in court. For those following the case hoping for more revelations, it was disappointing. For Gabby's family, the decision to settle suggested they'd reached a point where continued litigation caused more pain than closure. The story of Gabby Petito resonates because it represents the collision of dreams and darkness. Here was a young woman with plans and aspirations, someone working to build a life and career doing something she loved. She documented her journey for thousands of followers, sharing the beauty she encountered, never revealing the fear or pain that might have been growing beneath the surface. When her body was found in that beautiful Wyoming wilderness, it shattered the illusion, not just for her followers, but for anyone who'd ever believed that happiness was just one adventure, one relationship, one perfect moment away. What really happened to Gabby Petito wasn't just a murder. It was the end result of a toxic relationship dynamic that had likely been building for years. It was the failure of a system that should have protected her when she encountered police during a clear crisis. It was a young woman trapped far from home with someone who ultimately chose violence over letting her go. The specifics of those final moments died with Brian Laundrie, but the broader truth is clear enough. Gabby wanted to live, to create, to share beauty with the world. Someone took that away from her in the most brutal way imaginable, then tried to escape responsibility rather than face what he'd done. In the years since Gabby's death, her mother, Nicole, has continued advocating for domestic violence awareness and education. She speaks publicly about warning signs she wishes she'd recognized, though she's careful not to blame herself. Domestic abusers are skilled at hiding their behavior from others, at presenting different faces to the world than they show their victims. No one who loved Gabby failed her. Only Brian Laundrie failed her. In the worst possible way. The white van that became so iconic during the search for Gabby was eventually returned to her family. It sits now as a painful reminder of what should have been an adventure, but became a crime scene. The Instagram account that Gabby curated so carefully remains active, maintained by her family, a digital memorial to her life and dreams. The final posts are from late August 2021, frozen in time, showing a smiling Gabby who had no idea how little time she had left. If there's any meaning to be found in this tragedy, it's in the conversations it sparked and continues to spark, about domestic violence, about recognizing abuse, about believing victims, about not letting someone's public persona blind us to private pain. It's in the law enforcement reforms some jurisdictions have implemented, providing better training on identifying domestic violence situations. It's in the families who've had difficult conversations about relationship warning signs because of Gabby's story. It's in the people who've reached out for help to leave dangerous situations, who've recognized their own experiences in what happened to Gabby and made the choice to escape before it was too late. Gabby Petito was 22 years old when she died. She should have had decades ahead of her, should have gotten to see her dreams realized or change them for new dreams, should have gotten to grow and learn and love and live. Instead, her life ended in violence, her body left alone in the wilderness by someone who'd promised to cherish her. The dream road trip ended not with achievement and joy, but with tragedy that rippled out to affect millions of people who'd never even met her. So what really happened to Gabby Petito? The simple answer is that she was murdered by her fiancé during what was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. But the fuller answer is more complex, involving patterns of control and abuse, system failures, the distorting effects of social media, and ultimately the fatal consequences when violence escalates in an isolated environment. Her story serves as both a memorial and a warning, a reminder that behind perfect pictures and happy captions, people might be suffering in ways invisible to outsiders. If Gabby's story affected you, if you found yourself invested in learning what happened to her and wanting justice for her, consider channeling that energy into supporting domestic violence prevention organizations in your community. Consider educating yourself on the signs of abusive relationships so you can help friends or family members who might be in danger. Consider advocating for law enforcement training and policies that better protect vulnerable people. Subscribe to channels that cover these issues responsibly and share resources that might help someone in crisis. Comment below if you think there are lessons we should be learning from cases like this. And like this video to help ensure that Gabby's story continues to reach people who need to hear it. I trust that her death wasn't in vain and that perhaps, in some small way, understanding what happened to her might help prevent similar tragedies in the future. The full case breakdown of what happened to Gabby Petito leaves us with more than just facts about a murder investigation. It leaves us with questions about how we value and protect young women, how we intervene in domestic violence situations, how we reconcile the lives people present to the world with the realities they experience privately, and how we remember victims not just as cautionary tales, but as full human beings with hopes and dreams that deserve to be realized. Gabby wanted to inspire people through her travels. In death, she's inspired different conversations than she intended, but important ones nonetheless. Her family works to ensure she's remembered not primarily as a victim, but as a vibrant young woman who loved life and adventure. That's the memory worth preserving, even as we learn from the tragedy that cut her life so short.